Chapter 2. The Carpet Bag. I stuffed a shirt or two into my old carpet bag, tucked in under my arm, and started for Cape Horn and the Pacific. Quitting the good city of Old Manhattan, I duly arrived in the New Bedford. It was on a Saturday night in December. Much was I disappointed upon learning that the little packet for Nantucket had already sailed, and that no way of reaching that place would offer till the following Monday. As most young candidates for the pains and penalties for whaling stop at this same Bedford tends to embark on their voyage, it may as well be related that I, for one, had no idea of so doing, for my mind was made up for to sail in no other than a Nantucket craft, because there is a fine, boisterous something about everything connected with that famous old island, which amazingly pleased me. Besides, though, New Bedford has of late been gradually monopolizing the business of whaling, and though in this matter poor old Nantucket is now much behind her, yet Nantucket was her great original, the Tyre of this Carthage, the new place where the first dead American whale was stranded. Where else but from Nantucket did those aboriginal whalemen, the red men, first sally out in canoes to give chase to the Leviathan? And where but from Nantucket too did that first adventurous little sloop put forth, partly laden with imported cobblestones, so goes the story, to throw at the whales in order to discover when they were nigh enough to risk a harpoon from the bowstrip. Now having a night, a day, and still another night following before me in New Bedford, ere I could embark for my destined port, it became a matter of concernment where I was to eat and sleep meanwhile. It was a very dubious looking, nay, a very dark, dismal night, bitingly cold and cheerless. I knew no one in the place. With anxious grapnel I had sounded my pocket, and only brought up a few pieces of silver, so, wherever you go, Ishmael, said I to myself, as I stood in the middle of a dreary street, shouldering my bag, and comparing the gloom towards the north with the darkness toward the south, wherever in your wisdom you may conclude to lodge for the night, my dear Ishmael, be sure to inquire the price, and don't be too particular. With halting steps I paced the streets, and passed the sign of the Crossed Harpoons, but it looked too expensive and jolly there. Further on, from the bright red windows of the Swordfish Inn, there came such a fervent rays that it seemed to have melted the packet snow and ice from before the house, for everywhere else the congealed frost lay 10 inches thick on a hard asphaltic pavement, rather weary for me when I struck my foot against the flinty projection, because from hard, remorseless service the soles of my boot were in the most miserable plight. Too expensive and jolly again, thought I, pausing one moment to watch the broad glare in the street, and hear the sounds of the tinkling glasses within. But go on, Ishmael, said I at last. Don't you hear? Get away from before the door, you patched boots are stopping the way. So on I went. I now by instinct followed the streets that took me waterward, for there, doubtless, were the cheapest, if not the cheeriest inns. Such dreary streets, blocks of blackness, not houses, on either hand, and here and there a candle, like a candle moving about in a tomb. At this hour of the night, of the last day of the week, that quarter of the town proved all but deserted. But presently I came to a smoky light proceeding from a low, white building, the door of which stood invitingly open. It had a careless look, as if it were meant for the uses of the public. So entering, the first thing I did was to stumble over an ash box in the porch. "Hi!" thought I. "Ha!" as the flying particles almost choked me. Are these ashes from that destroyed city, Gomorrah? But the crossed harpoon, the swordfish. This then must need to be a sign of the trap. However, I picked myself up, and hearing a loud voice within, pushed on and opened the second interior door. It seemed the great black parliament sitting in Tophet. 100 black faces turned around in their rows to peer, and beyond the black angel of doom was beating a book in a pulpit. It was a Negro church, and the preacher's text was about the blackness of darkness, and weeping and wailing and teeth gnashing there. "Ha, Ishmael," muttered I, backing out. "Wretched entertainment at the sign of the trap. Moving on, I at last came to a dim sort of light not far from the docks, and heard the forlorn creaking in the air, and looking up, saw a swinging sign over the door with a white painting upon it, faintly representing a tall, straight jet of misty spray, and these words underneath: The Sprouter Peter Coffin. Coffin? Spouter? Rather ominous in that particular connection, thought I. But it is a common name in Nantucket, they say, and I suppose this Peter here is an emigrant from there. As the light looked so dim, and the place for the time looked quiet enough, and the dilapidated little wooden house itself looked as if it might have been carted here from the ruins of some burnt district, and as the swinging sign had poverty-stricken sort of creak to it, I thought that here was the very spot for cheap lodgings, and the best of pea coffee. It was a queer sort of place, a gable-ended old house, one side palsied as it were, and leaning over sadly. It stood on a sharp bleak corner where the tempestuous wind, Euroclydon, kept up a worse howling than ever it did about poor Paul's Tosscraft. Euroclydon, nevertheless, is a mighty pleasant sphere to anyone indoors, with his feet on the hob quietly toasting for bed. In judging of that tempestuous wind called Euroclydon, says an old writer, of whose works I possess the only copy extant, it maketh a marvellous difference whether thou lookest out it from a glass window where the frost is all on the outside, or whether thou observest it from that sashless window where the frost is on both sides, and of which the white death is the only glazier. True enough, thought I, as this passage occurred to my mind. Old black letter, thou reasonest well. Yes, these eyes are windows, and this body of mine is the house. What a pity they didn't stop up the chinks and the crannies, though, and thrust in a little lint here and there. But it's too late to make any improvements now. The universe is finished, the copperstone is on, and the chips were cut off 1,000,000 years ago. Poor Lazarus there, chattering his teeth against the curbstone for his pillow, and shaking off his tatters with his shiverings, he might plug up both ears with rags and put a corn cob into his mouth, and yet that would not keep the tempestuous Euroclydon. Euroclydon, says old Dives in his red silken wrapper. He had rather one afterwards. Pooh, pooh. What a fine frosty night. How Orion glitters. What northern lights. Let them talk of their oriental simmered climes of everlasting conservatories. Give me the privilege of making my own summer with my coals. But what thinks Lazarus? Can he warm his blue hands by holding them up to the grand northern lights? Would not Lazarus rather be in Sumatra than here? Would he not far rather lay him down lengthwise along the line of equator? Yea, ye gods, go down to the fiery pit itself in order to keep out this frost? Now that Lazarus should lie stranded there on the curbstone before the door of Dives, this is more wonderful than that an iceberg should be moored to the one of the Moluccas. Yet Dives himself, he too lives like a tsar in an ice palace made of frozen sighs, and being a president of a temperance society, he only drinks the tepid tears of orphans. But no more of this blubbering now. We are going a whaling, and there's plenty of that yet to come. Let us scrape the ice from our frosted feet and see what sort of place this spouter may be. Chapter 3. The Spoutering. Entering that gable-ended spouter, you found yourself in a wide, low, strangling entry with old-fashioned wainscots, reminding one of the bulwarks of some condemned old craft. On one side hung a very large oil painting so thoroughly besmoked and every way defaced that in the unequal cross-light by which you viewed it, it was only by diligent study and series of systematic visits to it, and careful inquiry of neighbors, that you could anyway arrive at understanding of its purpose. Such unaccountable masses of shades and shadows that at first you almost thought some ambitious young artist in the time of New England hags had endeavored to delineate chaos bewitched. But by dint of much and earnest contemplation, and oft repeated ponderings, and especially by throwing open the little window towards the back of the entry, you at last come to the conclusion that such an idea, however wild, might not be altogether unwarranted. But what most puzzled and confounded you was the long, limber, pretentious black mass of something hovering in the center of the picture over three blue, dim, perpendicular lines floating in a nameless east. A boggy, soggy, squishy picture, truly enough to drive a nervous man distracted. Yet was there a sort of indefinite, half attained, unimaginable sublimity about it that fairly froze you to it, till you involuntarily took an oath with yourself to find out what that marvelous painting meant. Ever and anon a bright, but alas deceptive idea would dart you through. Is the Black Sea in the midnight gale? It's the unnatural combat of the four primal elements. It's a blasted heath. It's Hyperborean winter scene. It's the breaking up of icebound stream of time. But at last all these fancies yielded to that one pretentious something in the picture's midst. That once found out, and all the rest were plain. But stop. Does it not bear faint resemblance to a gigantic fish? Even the great Leviathan himself? In fact, the artist designs him this, a final theory of my own, partly based upon aggregated opinions of many aged persons with whom I conversed upon the subject. The picture represents a Cape Horner in a great hurricane, the half-foundered fish weltering there with its three dismantled masts alone visible, and the exasperated whale, purposing to spring clean over the craft, is the enormous act of impaling himself upon the three mastheads. The opposite wall of this entry was hung all over with a heathenish array of monstrous clubs and spears. Some were thickly set with glittering teeth resembling ivory saws, others were tufted with knots of human hair, and one was sickle-shaped, with a vast handle seeping round like a segment made in a new mown, grasped by a long-armed mower. You shuddered as you gazed, and wondered what monstrous cannibal and savage could ever have gone at death harvesting with such a hackling, horrifying implement. Mixed with these were rusty old whaling lances and harpoon all broken and deformed. Some were storied weapons. With this once long lance, now wildly elbowed, 50 years ago did Nathan Swain kill 15 whales between the sunrise and the sunset. And that harpoon, so like a corkscrew now, was flung in Javan seas and run away with by a whale year afterwards, slain off the Cape of Blanco. The original iron entered nigh the tail, and like the restless needle sojourning in the body of a man, travelled the full 40 feet, and at last was found embedded in the hump. Crossing this dusky entry, and undrew a young, low-arched way cut through what in old times must have been a great central chimney with fireplaces all around, you entered the public room. A still duskier place is this, with such a low, ponderous beam above, and such old wrinkled planks beneath, that you would almost fancy you trod some old craft's cockpit, especially of such a howling night, when this corner anchored old ark rocked so furiously. On one side stood a long, low shelf-like table covered with cracked glass cases, filled with dusty rarities gathered from this wide world's remotest nook. Projecting from the further angle of the room stands a dark-looking den, the bar, a rude attempt at the right whale's head. Be that how it may, there stands a vast arched bone of the whale's jaw, so wide a coach might almost drive beneath it. Within are shabby shelves ranged round with old decanters, bottles, flasks, and in those jaws of swift destruction, like another cursed Jonah, by which name indeed they called him, bustles a little withered old man who, for their money, dearly sells the sailors deliriums and deaths. Abominable are the tumblers into which he pours his potion, though true cylinders within, the villainous green goggling glasses deceitfully taper downwards to a cheating bottom. Parallel meridians rudely pegged into the glass surround these footpaths goblets. Fill to this mark, and your charge is but a penny. To this a penny more, and so on to the full glass, the Cape Horn measure, which you may gulp down for shilling. Upon entering the place, I found a number of young seamen gathered about the table, examining by a dim light divers specimens of scrimshander. I thought the landlord, and telling him I desired to be accommodated with the room, received for answer that his house was full, not a bed unoccupied. But avast, he added, tapping his forehead, you hain't no objection to sharing a harpooner's blanket, have ye? I suppose you are going a whaling, so you would better get used to that sort of thing. I told him that I never liked to sleep two in a bed, that if I should ever do so, it would depend upon who the harpooner might be, and that if he, the landlord, really had no other place for me, and the harpooner was not decidedly objectionable, why, rather than wander further about the strange town on so bitter a night, I would put up with the half of any decent man's blanket. I thought so. All right, take a seat. Supper? You want supper? Supper will be ready directly. I sat down on an old wooden settle, carved all over like a bench on a battery. At one end, at one end, a ruminating tar was still further adorning it with his jackknife, stooping over and diligently working away at the space between his legs. He was trying his hand at that ship under full sail, but he didn't make much headway, I thought. At last, some 4 or 5 of us were summoned to our meal in an adjoining room. It was cold as Iceland, no fire at all. The landlord said he couldn't afford it. Nothing but 2 dismal tallow candles, each in a winding sheet. We were fain to button up our monkey jackets and hold to our lips cup of scalding tea with our half-frozen fingers. But the fare was of the most substantial kind. Not only meat and potatoes, but dumplings. Good heavens! Dumplings for supper. One young fellow in a green box coat addressed himself to these dumplings in a most direful manner. My boy, said the landlord, you'll have the nightmare to dead certainty. Landlord, I whispered, that ain't the harpooner, is it? Oh no, said he, looking sort of diabolically funny. The harpooner is a dark complexioned chap. He never eats dumplings. He don't. He eats nothing but steaks, and likes 'em rare. The devil he does, says I. Where is that harpooner? Is he here? He'll be here afore long, was the answer. I could not help it, but I began to feel suspicious of this dark complexioned harpooner. At any rate, I made up my mind that if it so turned out that we should sleep together, we must undress and get into bed before I did. Supper over, the company went back to the barroom, when, knowing not what else to do with myself, I resolved to spend the rest of the evening as a looker on. Presently a rioting noise was heard about. Starting up, the landlord cried, that's the Grampus's crew. I see it reported in the offing this morning, a 3 years' voyage, and a full ship. Hurrah, boys! Now we'll have the latest news from the Fijis. A trampling of the sea boots was heard in the entry, the door was flung open, and in rolled a wild set of mariners enough, enveloped in their shaggy watch coats, with their heads muffled in woolen comforters, all bedarned and ragged, and their beards stiff with icicles. They seemed an eruption of beers from Labrador. They had just landed from their boat, and this was the first house they entered. No wonder then that they made straight wake for the whale's mouth, the bar, when the wrinkled little old Jonah, their officiating, soon poured them out, brimmers all round. One complained of a bad cold in his head, upon which Jonah mixed him a pitch-like potion of gin and molasses, which he swore was a sovereign cure for all colds and catarrhs whatsoever. Never mind of how long standing or whatever whether cut off the coast of Labrador or on the weather side of an ice island. The liquor soon mounted into their heads, as it generally does even with the arrantest toppers newly landed from sea, and they began capering about most obstreperously. I observed, however, that one of them held somewhat aloof, and though he seemed desirous not to spoil the hilarity of his shipmates by his own sober face, yet upon the whole he refrained from making as much noise as the rest. This man interested me at once, and since the sea gods had ordained that he should soon become my shipmate, though but sleeping partner one, So far as this narrative is concerned, I will here venture upon a little description of him. He stood full 6 feet in height, with noble shoulders, and chest like cofferdam. I have seldom seen such a brawn in a man. His face was deeply brown and burnt, making his white teeth dazzling by the contrast, while in the deep shadows of his eyes floated some reminiscences that did not seem to give him such much joy. His voice at once announced that he was a Southerner, and from his fine stature, I thought he must be one of those tall mountaineers from the Alleghanian region, Virginia. When the revelry of his companions had mounted to its height, this man slipped away unobserved, and I saw one more of him till he became my comrade on the sea. In a few minutes, however, he was missed by his shipmates, and being, it seems, for some reason, a huge favourite with them, they raised the cry of Bolkington, Bolkington, where's the Bolkington? And darted out of the house in pursuit of them. It was now about 9 o'clock, and the room seeing almost supernaturally quiet after those orgies, I began to congratulate myself upon a little plan that occurred to me just previous to the entrance of the seamen. No man prefers to sleep two in a bed. In fact, you would a good deal rather not sleep with your own brother. I don't know how it is, but people like to be private when they are sleeping. And when it comes to sleeping with a known stranger, in a stranger inn, in a strange town, and that stranger harpooner, then your objections definitely multiply. Indefinitely multiply. Nor was there any earthly reason why I, as a sailor, should sleep two in a bed more than anybody else. For sailors no more sleep two in a bed at sea than a bachelor king do ashore. To be sure, they all sleep together in one apartment, but you have your own hammock, and cover yourself with your own blanket, and sleep in your own skin. The more I pondered over this harpooner, the more I abominated the thought of sleeping with him. It was fair to presume that being a harpooner, his linen or woolen, as the cage might be, would not be of the tidiest, certainly none of the finest. I began to twitch all over. Besides, it was getting late, and my decent harpooner ought to be home and going bedwards. Suppose now he should be tumbling upon me at midnight. How could I tell from that wild hole he had been coming? Landlord, I've changed my mind about the harpooner. I shan't sleep with him. I'll try the bench here. Just as you please. I'm sorry I can spare you a tablecloth for a mattress, and it's a plaguey old rough board here, feeling of the knots and notches. But wait a bit, Scrimshander. I've got your carpenter's plane there in the bar. Wait, I say, and I'll make ye snug enough. So saying, he procured the plane, and was with his old silk handkerchief first dusting the bench, vigorously set to planning away at my bed, whilst grinning like an ape. The shavings flew right and left, till at last the plain iron came bump against the indestructible knot. The landlord was near spraining his wrist, and I told him for heaven's sake to quit. The bed was soft enough to suit me, and I did not know how all the in the world would planing in the world could make either down of a pine plank. So, gathering up the shavings with another grin, and throwing them into the great stove in the middle of a room, he went about his business, and left me in a brown study. I now took the measure of the bench, and found that it was a foot too short, but that could be mended with the chair. But it was a foot too narrow, and the other bench in the room was about 4 inches higher than the planed one, so there was no yoke in them. I then placed the first bench lengthwise along the only clear space against the wall, leaving a little interval between for my back to settle down in. But I soon found that there came such a draught of cold air over me from under the sill of the window that this plan would never do at all, especially as another current from the rickety door met the one from the window, and both together formed a series of small whirlwinds in the immediate vicinity of the spot where I had thought to spend the night. The devil fish that harpooned, thought I, but stop. Couldn't I steal a march on him, bolt his door inside, and jump into his bed, not to be wakened by the most violent knockings? It seemed no bad idea, but upon second thought I dismissed it, for who could tell but that what the next morning, so soon as I popped out of the room, the harpooner might be standing in the entry, all ready to knock me down. Still, looking round me again, seeing no possible chance of spending a sufferable night unless in some other person's bed, I began to think that after all I might be cherished unwarrantable prejudices against this unknown harpooner. Thinks I, I'll wait I'll wait a while. He must be dropping in before long. I'll have a good look at him then, and perhaps we may become jolly good bedfellows after all. There's no telling. But though the other boarders kept coming in by ones, twos, and threes, and going to bed, yet no sign of my harpooner. Landlord, said I, what sort of chap is he? Does he always keep such late hours? It was now hard upon 12 o'clock. The landlord chuckled again with his lean chuckle, and seemed to be mightily tickled at something beyond my comprehension. No, he answered. Generally he is early bird, early to bed and early to rise. Yeah, he's the right he's the bird that what catches the worm. But tonight he went out peddling, you see, and I don't see what on earth kept him so late, unless maybe he can't sell his head. Can't sell his head? What sort of bamboozlingly story is this you are telling me, getting into towering rage? Do you pretend to say, landlord, that this harpooner is actually engaged this blessed Saturday night, or rather Sunday morning, in peddling his head around this town? That's precisely it, said the landlord, and I told him he couldn't sell it here. The market's overstocked. With what? Shouted I. With heads, to be sure. Ain't there too many heads in the world? I tell you what it is, landlord, said I quite calmly. You'd better stop spinning that yarn to me. I'm not agreeing. Maybe not, taking out stick and whittling a toothpick. But I rather guess you'll be done brown if there that harpooner hears you slandering his head. I'll break it for him, said I, now flying upon into a passion again at this unaccountable farrago of the landlord's. It's broke already, said he. Broke, I said. I broke, do you mean? Certain, and that's the very reason he can't sell it, I guess. Landlord, said I, going up to him as cool as Mount Hecla in the snowstorm. Landlord, stop whittling. You and I must understand one another, and that too without delay. I come to your house and want a bed. You tell me you can only give me a half once, that the other half belongs to a certain harpooner. And about this harpooner, whom I have not seen yet, you persist in telling me the most mystifying and exasperating stories, tending to beget in me an uncomfortable feeling towards the man whom you designed for my bedfellow, a sort of connection, landlord, which is an intimate and confidential one in the highest degree. I now demand of you to speak out and tell me who and what this harpooner is, and whether I shall be in all respect safe to spend the night with him. And in the first place, you will be so good as to unsay that story about selling his head, which if true I take to be a good evidence that this harpooner is a stark man, and I have no idea of sleeping with a madman. And you, sir, you I mean, landlord, you, sir, by trying to induce me to do so knowingly, would thereby render yourself liable to criminal prosecution. Wall, said the landlord, fetching a long breath. That's a purity long sermon for a chap that rips a little now and then. But be easy, be easy. This here harpooner I have been telling you of has just arrived from the South Seas, where he brought up a lot of balmed New Zealand heads. Great curious, you know. And he's sold all on them but once. That one he's trying to sell tonight. 'Cause tomorrow Sunday it would not do to be selling human heads about the streets when folks is going to churches. He wanted to last Sunday, but I stopped him just as he was going out of the door with four heads strung on a string, for all the earth like a string of Indians. This account cleared up the otherwise unaccountable mystery, and showed that the landlord, after all, had no idea of fooling me. But at the same time, what could I think of a harpooner who stayed out of Saturday night clean into the holy Sabbath, engaged in such cannibal business as selling the heads of dead idolaters? Depend upon it, landlord, the harpooner is a dangerous man. He pays a regular, was the rejoin. But come, it's getting dreadful late. You had better be turning flukes. It's a nice bed. Sal and me slept in that bed the night we were spliced. There's a plenty room for two to kick about in that bed. It's an almighty big bed, Dad. Why afore we give it up? Sal used to put our Sam and little Johnny in the foot of it. But I got a dreaming and sprawling about one night, and somehow Sam got pitched on the floor and came near breaking his arm. After that, Sal said it wouldn't do. Come along here, I'll give you a glim in a jiffy. And so saying, he lighted a candle and held it toward me, offering to lead the way. But I stood irresolute when looking at the clock in the corner. He exclaimed, I vomit it's a Sunday. You won't see that harpooner tonight. He's come to anchor somewhere. Come along then. Do come, won't you come? I considered the matter a moment, and then upstairs we went, and I was ushered into a small room, cold as a clam, and furnished, sure enough, with a prodigious bed, almost big enough indeed for any four harpooners to sleep abreast. There, said the landlord, placing the candle on a crazy old sea chest that did double duty as a washstand and center table. There, make yourself comfortable now, and good night to ye. I turned around from me eyeing the bed, but he had disappeared. Holding back the counterplane, I stooped over the bed. Though none of the most elegant, it yet stood the scrutiny tolerably well. I then glanced around the room, and besides the bedstead and center table, I could see no other furniture belonging to the place but a rude shelf, the four walls, and a papered fireboard representing a man striking a whale. Of things not properly belonging to the room, there was a hammock lashed up, and a throne upon the floor in one corner, also a large seaman's bag containing the harpooner's wardrobe, no doubt in the lieu of a land trunk. Likewise, there was a parcel of outlandish bonefish hooks on the shelf over the fireplace, and a tall harpoon standing at the head of the bed. But what is this on the chest? I took it up and held it close to the light, and felt it and smelt it, and tried every way possible to arrive at some satisfactory conclusion concerning it. I can compare it to nothing but a large doormat, ornamented at the edges with a little tinkling tag, something like the stained porcupine quills around an Indian moccasin. There was a hole or slit in the middle of this mat, as you see the same in South American pontcos. But could it be possible that any sober harpooner would get into a doormat and parade the street of any Christian town in that sort of guise? I put it on to try, and it weighed me down like a hamper, being uncommonly shaggy and thick, and I thought a little damp, as though this mysterious harpooner had been wearing it off a rainy day. I went up in it to a bit of glass struck against the wall, and I never saw such a sight in my life. I tore myself out of it in such a hurry that I gave myself a kink in the neck. I sat down on the side of the bed and commenced thinking about this head peddling harpooner and his doormat. After thinking some time on the bedside, I got up and took off my monkey jacket and then stood in the middle of the room thinking. I then took off my coat and thought a little more in my shirt sleeves, but beginning to feel very cold now, half undressed as I was, and remembering what the landlord said about the harpooners not coming home at all that night, it being so very late, I made no more ado but jumped out of my pantaloons and boots, and then blowing out the light tumbled into bed, and commenced myself to the care of heaven. Whether that mattress was stuffed with corn cobs or broken crockery, there is no telling, but I rolled about a good deal and could not sleep for a long time. At last I slid off into a light doze, and had very nearly made a good offing towards the land of Nod, when I heard heavy footfalls in the passage, and saw a glimmer of light come into a room from under the door. Lord save me, thinks I, that must be a harpooner, the infernal head peddler. But I lay perfectly still, and resolved not to say a word till spoken to. Holding light in one hand, and that identical New Zealand head on the other, the stranger entered the room, without looking toward the bed, placed his candle a good way off from me on the floor in one corner, and then began working away at the knotted cords of the large bag I before spoke of as being in the room. I was all eagerness to see his face, but he kept it averted for some time while employed in unlacing the bag's mouth. This accomplished, however, he turned around when, good heavens, what a sight! Such a face! It was of dark purplish, yellow color, here and there stuck over with large blackish looking squares. Yes, it's just as I thought. He's a terrible bedfellow. He's been in a fight, got dreadfully cut, and here he is, just from the surgeon. but at that moment he chanced to turn his face so toward the light that I plainly saw they could not be sticking plasters at all. Those black squares on his cheeks, they were stains of some sort of or other. At first I knew not what to make of this, but soon an inkling of truth occurred to me. I remembered the story of a white man, whaleman too, who, falling among the cannibals, had been tattooed by them. I concluded that this harpooner, in the course of his distant voyages, must have met with a similar adventure. And what is it, thought I, after all? It's only his outside. A man can be honest in any sort of skin. But then, what to make of his unearthly complexion? That part of it, I mean, lying around about, and completely independent of the squares of the tomb. To be sure, it might be nothing but a good coat of tropical tanning, but I never heard of a hot sun tanning white man into a purplish yellow one. However, I had never been in the South Seas, and perhaps the sun there procures these extraordinary effects upon the skin. Now, while all these ideas were passing through me like a lightning, the harpooner never noticed me at all, but after some difficulty having opened his bag, he commenced fumbling in it, and presently pulled out sort of tomahawk and a sealskin wallet with the hair on. Placing this on the old chest in the middle of the room, he then took the New Zealand head, ghastly, ghastly thing enough, and crammed it down into the bag. He now took off his hat, a new beaver hat, when I came nigh, singing out with a fresh surprise. There was no hair on his head, none to speak of at least, nothing but a small scalp knot twisted up on his forehead. His bald purplish head now looked for all the world like a mildewed skull. Hi. Det har bättre att ha. Okay. There was no hair on his head, none to speak of at least, nothing but a small scalp knot twisted up on his forehead. His bald purplish head now looked for all the world like a mildewed skull. Had not the stranger stood between me and the door, I would have bolted out of it quicker than ever I bolted the dinner. Even as it was, I thought something of slipping out of the window, but it was the second floor back. I am no coward, but what to make of his head peddling purple rascal altogether past my comprehension. Ignorance is the parent of fear, and being completely nonplussed and confounded about the stranger, I confess I was now as much afraid of him as if it was the devil himself who had thus broken into my room at the dead of the night. In fact, I was so afraid of him, that I was not game enough just then to address him and demand satisfactory answer concerning what seemed inexplicable in him. Meanwhile, he continued the business of undressing, and at last showed his chest and arms. As I lived, these covered parts of him were checkered with the same squares as his face. His back, too, was all over the same dark squares. He seemed to have been in a 30 years' war and just escaped from it with a sticking plaster shirt. Still more, his very legs were marked, as if a parcel of dark green frogs were running up the trunks of young palms. It was now quite plain that he must be some abominable savage or other shipped aboard of a whaleman in the South Seas, and so landed in this Christian country. I quaked to think of it. A peddler of heads too, perhaps the heads of his own brothers. He might take a fancy to mine. Heavens, look at that tomahawk. But there was no time for shuddering, for now the savage went about something that completely fascinated my attention, and convinced me that he must indeed be a heathen. Going to his heavy grego or rappel or dreadnought, which he had previously hung on a chair, he fumbled in the pocket and produced at length a curious little deformed image with the hunch off on its back, and exactly color of 3 days old Congo baby. Remembering the embalmed head, at first I almost thought that this black mannequin was a real baby preserved in some similar manner, but seeing that it was not at all a limber, and that it glistened a good deal of polished ebony, I concluded that it must be nothing but a wooden idol, which indeed it proved to be. For now the savage goes up to the empty fireplace, removing the papered fireboard, set up this little hunchbacked image, like a tent pin, between the andirons. The chimney jambs and all the bricks inside were very sooty, so that I thought this fireplace made a very appropriate little shrine or chapel for his Congo idol. I now screwed my eyes hard towards the half-written image, feeling but ill at ease meantime, to see what was the next to follow. First, he takes about double handful of shaving out of his Gregor pocket and placed them carefully before his idol. Then, laying a bit of ship biscuit on the top, applying the flame from the lamp, he kindled the shaving into a sacrificial blaze. Presently, after many hasty snatches into the fire, and still hastier withdrawals of his fingers, whereby he seemed to be scorching them badly, he at last succeeded in drawing off the biscuit, then blowing off heat and ashes a little. He made a polite offer of it to the little negro, but the little devil did not seem to fancy such dry sort of fare at all. He never moved his lips. All these strange antics were accompanied by still stranger guttural noises from the devotee, who seemed to be praying in a sing-song or else singing some pagan psalmody or other, during which his face twitched about in the most unnatural manner. At last, extinguishing the fire, he took the idol up very unceremoniously and bagged it again in his Gregor pocket as carelessly as if he were a sportsman bagging dead woodcock. All these queer proceedings increased my uncomfortableness, and seeing him now exhibiting strong symptoms of concluding his business operations and jumping into bed with me, I thought it was a high time, now or never, before the light was put out, to break the spell in which I had so long been around. But the interval I spent in deliberating what to say was a fatal one. Taking up his tomahawk from the table, he examined the head of it for an instant, then holding to the light with his mouth at the table, he puffed out great clouds of tobacco smoke. The next moment the light was extinguished, and this wild cannibal tomahawk between his teeth sprang into bed with me. I sang out. I could not help it now, and giving a sudden grunt of astonishment, he began feeling me, stammered out something, I knew not what. I rolled away from him against the wall, and then conjured him, whoever or whatever he might be, to be quiet and let me get up and light the lamp again. But his guttural responses satisfied me at once that he but ill comprehended my meaning. Who the devil you? He said at last. You no speaker, dama, I kill it. And so saying, the lighted tomahawk began flourishing about me in the dark. Landlord, for God's sake, Peter Coffin, shouted I. Landlord, watch, Coffin, angel, save me. Speak ye, tell me who it be, or damn me, I kill ye. Again growled the cannibal, while his horrid flourishing of a tomahawk scattered the hot tobacco ashes about me till I thought my linen would get on fire. But thank heaven, at the moment the landlord came into the room, light in hand, and leaping from the bed, I ran up to him. Don't be afraid now, said he, grinning again. Quick cake here wouldn't harm a hair of your head. Stop your grinning, shouted I, and why didn't you tell me that the infernal harpooner was a cannibal? I thought you knowed it, didn't I tell ye? He was a peddling head around town, but turn flukes again and go to sleep. Quick, look here, you sabby me, I sabby you. This man sleepy you sabby? Me sabby plenty, grunted Quick, puffing away at his pipe and sitting up in bed. You get in, he added, motioning to me with his tomahawk, throwing the clothes to one side. He really did this in not only a civil but really kind and charitable way. I stood looking at him a moment. For all his tattooings, he was on the whole clean, comely-looking cannibal. What's all this fuss I have been making about? Thought I to myself. The man's a human being, just as I am. He has just as much reason to fear me as I have to be afraid of him. Better sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian. Landlord, said I, tell him to stash his tomahawk there, or pipe, or whatever you call it. Tell him to stop smoking, in short, and I will turn in with him. But I don't fancy having a man smoking in bed with me. It's dangerous. Besides, I ain't insured. This being told to Quick, he at once complied, and again politely motioned me to get into bed, rolling over to one side as much as to say, I won't touch a leg fee. Good night, landlord, said I. You may go. I turned in and never slept better in my life. That was the end of chapter 3. Okay, see you next one.